the second Sunday. It's a program of the Peace and Social Order Committee of the West Falmouth Preparative Meeting in Falmouth, Mass. Today's topic is Sanctuary Today, a commitment to resist. Our speaker is Miriam Davidson, author, journalist, and editor whose writing focuses on the U.S. Mexican border. The topic is, what are our challenges facing the sanctuary movement in today's anti-immigrant climate? Davidson will discuss the current state of the movement on the border and nationally, including legal efforts by the Quakers and other religious organizations to defend their right to provide sanctuary in the face of government threats. She will give a brief history of the movement and what to look at as ahead for the immigrant rights activists and the people they represent. Today is Sunday, June 8th, 2025, and this is being filmed. We acknowledge we're on Wampanoag land. A question and answer period will follow, and this is one of the books, the first book that she published, Convictions of the Heart, Jim Corbett and the Sanctuary Movement. Her most recent book is The Beloved Border, Humanity and Hope in a Contested Land in 2021. And she is a member of the Arizona, Tucson Quaker meeting. And here I present Miriam Davidson. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. Everybody, I can see my screen, but while I'm showing my PowerPoint, I'm not going to be able to see you for technical reasons, so I apologize for that. But after I finish the talk, I'll be able to see everybody. Welcome. I'm going to start with the history of the 1980s sanctuary movement, its revival in the early 2010s, and then move on to today's truly terrifying situation for refugees and migrants in the U.S. Since this is a Quaker-sponsored talk, I'll be giving particular attention to activities of members of the Religious Society of Friends, and then I'll end with the legacy and some of the lessons of the sanctuary movement for today's times. Plan to keep this talk to about 45 minutes, so we have time for questions and comments from this learned audience. Okay, my first slide. This is the cover of my first book, published in 1988 by the University of Arizona Press. I came to Tucson in 1985 as a young Quaker journalist to cover the sanctuary trial and write about Jim Corbett, the man you see here in the center of this picture, this beautiful picture. The 1980 sanctuary movement, in a nutshell, was a nationwide movement to shelter undocumented Salvadoran and Guatemalan refugees from deportation by the U.S. government. Should also note that in the early 1980s, Stacy Merkt and Jack Elder in South Texas were the first people to face prosecution for helping refugees. A few others, like Demetria Martinez, a writer from New Mexico who had her poetry used against her on the stand, also faced prosecution during that time. So the Tucson community was not the only one, although it became the focus of attention as the birthplace of sanctuary. In the early 1980s, refugees from Salvadoran civil wars began arriving in Tucson. These included survivors of a mass death event in the Arizona desert in July 1980. One of these survivors is our compañera Dora Rodriguez, who went on to become an immigrant activist. Dora, if you're with us, welcome. Under U.S. and international law, until it was canceled by the current administration, asylum was theoretically possible for people who have a well-founded fear of persecution. The U.S. in those days made a distinction between political refugees and economic migrants. Political refugees were supposedly eligible for asylum. But although these people were fleeing death squads and war zones, refugees from Central America were called economic migrants by the U.S. government and deported. The government was supporting the governments of El Salvador and Guatemala, sending them money and weapons and training their militaries, so we could not admit that those people fleeing those governments were refugees fleeing political violence. This is a quote from Jim Corbett, the philosophical father of the sanctuary movement. After it became clear that the U.S. government was deporting refugees back to El Salvador and Guatemala, where human rights groups had documented that some of them were being murdered, people like Corbett and churches like Southside Presbyterian in Tucson began sheltering them and moving them to safe places. They worked in secret, and their efforts became known as the New Underground Railroad. Some, like Corbett, also went into Mexico to help refugees cross the border, which was a lot easier in those days. They debated about whether to go public, decided to do it after to gain support when they got word that they were all about to be arrested. This is the photo of the Declaration of Sanctuary on the steps of this Southside Presbyterian Church. Was declared at Southside Church on March 24th, 1982, the second anniversary of the assassination of Archbishop Romero. As you can see, here's John Fife. You can see my cursor. Gary McCoy, Jim Corbett, Ricardo Elford. Most of these people passed on. These are refugees. They were sheltering, some of them having their face covered. Ken Kennan, he's still alive. The signs say, La migra no profanidad del santuario, immigration, do not profane the sanctuary, and this is the sanctuary of God for the oppressed of Central America. After this declaration, Sanctuary got a lot of support. Hundreds of faith communities, organizations, municipalities joined the movement. Reporters went with Corbett to southern Mexico and documented his travel with refugees. He was on 60 Minutes. He was in People magazine. He became quite well known. Okay. John Fife said he knew that undercover agents were watching from their car across the street during the sanctuary declaration. Thought they might be arrested that night, but almost 2 years passed before they all were arrested. The INS, what's now called ICE, was sent agents wearing wires into the church to record what sanctuary workers were saying. This is a photo of Jesus Cruz, one of the undercover agents who infiltrated the church. In January 1985, 16 priests, nuns, and lay workers in both Arizona and Sonora were indicted by the Reagan administration on alien smuggling charges. Some pleaded down and others were dropped from the case, and 11 went on trial in the summer of 1985. This is a photo of Jim Corbett helping a refugee who went by the pseudonym Juana over the border fence. As you can see, the border fence in those days was a lot different from it is now. This was taken by a photographer for the Arizona Daily Star who went with Corbett on a border crossing journey in 1984. Juana was a Guatemalan woman who suffered terribly. She'd been raped by cops in Mexico. She had a really good case for political asylum. But this photo turned out to be a big turning point in the sanctuary trial because the photographer who took the picture refused to testify that he had taken it at the border under First Amendment grounds. The prosecutor needed the photographer to testify that it was taken at the border and not staged, someplace else. But after he refused to testify, Jim Corbett it was one of the main pieces of evidence against Jim Corbett. Okay, this is the cover of Sojourners magazine in July 1986. As you see, all the sanctuary workers were convicted, or almost all of them were. It was a big show trial, took 6 months. Bonnie Raitt and Joan Baez, both Quakers, came and did a benefit concert to raise money for the Sanctuary Defense Fund. The defendants tried to claim that they were doing civil initiative, not civil disobedience, but the judge would not, that they were upholding refugee law that the U.S. government was not upholding, but the judge would not allow the U.S. government policy to be put on trial. A lawyer friend of the judge's told me, you try individuals in court, you do not try causes. So the judge would not let them say why they were helping the refugees or whether these people were fleeing for their lives. He wouldn't let them talk about the torture that they'd endured, the suffering they endured, only whether they'd been helped across the border at such and such a time and such a place. So all but 3 of the defendants were convicted of conspiracy and other charges. The judge did give them probation. Corbett was acquitted since by then he had a less visible role and the photograph of him helping Juan across the border could not be used. The government was very disappointed not to get him since he was a ringleader, but Fife was one of the ones convicted. The convictions were upheld on appeal, but subsequent court cases resulted in temporary protected status being granted to Salvadorans and Guatemalans, and undercover recording in churches are now outlawed. Okay, so this is a death map of southern Arizona compiled by a group called Humane Borders. In the 1990s, after wall building began under Clinton, desert deaths began to climb. It went from 1 or 2 bodies being found in the Arizona deserts to more than 100 a year, some years more than 200. the sanctuary movement on the border shifted toward efforts to preventing deaths in the desert. Groups like Humane Borders, the Samaritans, No More Deaths, and others formed in the early 2000s. They put water in the desert and set up first aid camps. Also searched for human remains, trying to identify bodies and return them to families. About 10,000 people are known to have died on the U.S. Mexico border since the mid-1990s. Not only in the desert, but drowned in the river, high-speed chases, suffocated in the backs of trailers, falling from the wall. This doesn't include the thousands who've died in Mexico in accidents or murdered by cartels. There have been a few arrests of aid workers during this time, mostly for littering or driving in wilderness areas. One volunteer was cited for abandonment of property for leaving water in the desert 2 days after discovering the body of a 14-year-old Salvadoran girl. As you see, each one of these red dots represents a body that's been found. Okay, now I'm going to move on to the revival of the sanctuary movement in the 2010s. I'm going to read just a quick paragraph from my book, The Beloved Border. As the border crackdown intensified throughout the 1990s and 2000s, the meaning and purpose of sanctuary began to change. The term has no legal definition, and in a realization of Jim Corbett's vision, it came to represent a whole host of pro-immigrant policies and practices. These included churches and individuals sheltering people, public and private organizations declaring themselves off limits to immigration authorities, local and regional law enforcement refusing to cooperate with ICE, and local jurisdictions passing laws to prevent police cooperation with ICE. So that's where, this is a photograph of the renewal of sanctuary at Southside Presbyterian Church. This is Allison Harrington, who was the pastor after John 5. And this is Rosa Robles Loreto. She went into sanctuary in Southside in August of 2014 and was in there for over a year. And what happened is that under Obama, there was a renewed deportations and crackdown on undocumented people. And I think Obama did this because he thought that if he cracked down on immigrants, that Republicans would agree to immigration reform, but of course that never happened. Also, another thing that happened in this time was the computerization of local police records began to allow more coordination with ICE, with the feds. And ICE started giving local jurisdictions money and training to coordinate with them under programs called 287G and Secure Communities. There was one called Operation Stone Garden that gave money to local police departments to enforce immigration law. And on the border, a program of mass sentencing of border crossers called Operation Streamline was vastly expanded. It was designed to give migrants criminal records so they could be easily excluded in the future. Because as we know, crossing the border used to be a civil offense. It still is. The feds keep trying to criminalize it. Quickly became clear that all undocumented people, and not just political refugees, needed and deserved protection. And ICE started identifying detaining people after they were stopped for minor traffic violations. Churches began offering sanctuary again. Tucson sanctuary was revived. Here she is. Here's Pastor Harrington with Rosa Robles Loreto, a Mexican mother of 2 U.S. citizen children who was ordered deported after a traffic stop. She entered sanctuary in August 2014 at Southside Church and stayed for 15 months. And there were these "We Stand with Rosa" signs all over town. Being in sanctuary was hard on Rosa and the other parishioners, since for her safety, someone had to stay with her every single night for the 15 months. She was eventually given a stay of deportation, was allowed to leave the church. Other churches in other cities also offered sanctuary, and cities, states, and universities declared themselves sanctuaries from ICE enforcement. And as you can see, a lot of the resistance we're seeing now is already taking place on the border in the early 2010s. People were holding rallies, local jurisdictions were refusing to cooperate with ICE. Police were refusing money from Operation Stone Garden because they said it would interfere with their attempt to crack down on criminals if regular undocumented people were afraid to contact the cops. What were called flash mobs in those days would show up and surround Border Patrol vehicles when people were being arrested. In 2013, protesters chained themselves to buses at the federal courthouse in Tucson to prevent migrants sentenced under Operation Streamline from being taken away. Okay, this is a photograph that was taken during the first Trump administration in spring 2018 by my dear friend Mary Whitehead. Shows migrants awaiting at the border to apply for asylum. When Trump first took office, there were some workplace raids and threats of mass arrests, but nothing like we're seeing now. Attorney General Jeff Sessions took on sanctuary cities. He tried to withhold funds for policing and other purposes, but local jurisdictions fought back, especially places in Chicago and states like California and Massachusetts. By and large, the Trump administration was not successful at challenging sanctuary city laws. Courts said the feds cannot use spending powers or withhold funds to coerce compliance with immigration laws. Courts have also ruled that state and local governments have autonomy to determine their own policies. Okay, this is a notorious picture. I'm sure all of you remember this. Border Patrol chasing Haitian migrants being forced back across the Rio Grande near Del Rio, Texas in September 2021. This took place under the Biden administration. So the Biden administration, there was still obvious attempts here to continue the previous policies of mass incarcerations, deportations, but Biden was allowing people to apply for asylum. After the pandemic ended, there was a large crush of people who'd been waiting in Mexico to apply for asylum who came to the border. More than 500,000 people, mostly Venezuelans, crossed the Darien Gap, which is 60 miles of jungle between Colombia and Panama in 2023 alone. 173,000 Venezuelans applied for asylum that year, compared to 15,000 in 2021. So there was a whole bunch of people who were allowed into the country and applied for asylum, and they were given temporary status while their asylum cases were pending. Asylum applications were almost 456,000 in 2023, the highest number on record, covering 636,000 individuals. Venezuelans composed 22% of all applications, followed by Cuba at 17%, Colombia at 8.3%, 2.6% were unaccompanied minors. Okay, now we are moving into today. January of this year, the second Trump administration came in ready to effect mass arrests and deportations. They immediately announced they were canceling asylum hearings and refused to take any new asylum claims. They also have been trying to cancel temporary protected status for Venezuelans, Haitians, and Cubans. They also announced right away that they're canceling the previous ICE directive not to arrest people in sensitive locations, including churches, schools, and hospitals. They also started arresting people at courthouses, and that's what's happening here in this picture. Apparently, this family showed up for an immigration hearing in San Antonio in May, had their case dismissed, and then as they were leaving the courthouse were arrested. As you see, their children were zip-tied during this arrest. This arrest of children came a day after reports that agents dressed in plain clothes with nothing to identify them as federal immigration officials were arresting people as they emerged from the court. TV news crews observed 2 charter buses parked outside the court, and witnesses saw agents detaining people as they left the court. It's unclear if those agents or the one who took these children into custody worked for ICE. When activists asked the agents to identify themselves, they said they were FBI. The FBI does not normally tackle immigration enforcement, but under the Trump administration, NBC News has reported that there's been a policy shift requiring FBI field offices to reassign significant portions of their resources toward immigration. Other tactics currently being employed are deporting people to El Salvador and other places without due process, sending people to immigration prisons where they can't be reached, and moving detainees around so they can't be contacted by lawyers or their families. The Justice Department is also pursuing charges against a judge in Milwaukee, allegedly for helping a migrant escape ICE custody. With the goal of arresting 3,000 migrants a day, ICE quickly ran through real criminals, quote unquote, and is now arresting any undocumented person they can find. U.S. citizens, green card holders, people with temporary protected status or valid asylum claims are also being arrested. Roundups, raids are occurring everywhere, but have been focused on sanctuary cities and states, including Massachusetts. This photo depicts the arrest of 40 migrants on Martha's Vineyard in Nantucket on May 27th. ICE agents stopped work vans and hauled people away on the vineyard. That same day, I saw a Coast Guard vessel anchored in Vineyard Sound, not far from where I'm staying here in Falmouth. I'd never seen a Coast Guard vessel anchored there before, and I later learned it was there to take arrested migrants to the mainland. This use of Coast Guard and other federal agencies to arrest migrants is not only a waste of money, it prevents them from doing their actual jobs of saving lives, protecting natural resources, and preventing crime. The Vineyard Gazette reported that one of the ICE agents in the Martha's Vineyard raid had a white supremacist tattoo on his arm. ICE said this is just showing solidarity with the military in Afghanistan, but according to other sources, it's a white supremacist tattoo. Okay, I just want to briefly go over the political, legal, and community responses to what's been happening. As for the political response, here's the mayor of Boston testifying before Congress on Ash Wednesday with the mayors of Chicago, Denver, and New York. She forcefully defended Boston against charges of protecting criminals. She also recently has said publicly that ICE agents are acting like secret police with hidden faces. Other politicians and law enforcement officials are speaking out after a father was arrested dropping off his kid at school in Lynn, Massachusetts. The police chief said this does not make our community safer. Last month, the Justice Department arrested the Democratic mayor of Newark, New Jersey at a migrant detention facility in that city. Days later, the agency charged Representative Monica McIver with assaulting ICE officers during the same protest. A city council person was arrested here in Worcester, Massachusetts after a scuffle over an ICE arrest there. So politicians are starting to speak out and get arrested themselves. Okay, in terms of the legal response, the administration continues to pressure sanctuary jurisdictions through public rhetoric and legal threats, but its ability to impose financial penalties has been significantly constrained by judicial review. The government filed a lawsuit against the city of Rochester, New York, alleging local officials unlawfully interfered with federal immigration efforts. Rochester responded by joining a lawsuit filed in February in San Francisco by a coalition of local jurisdictions from across the country. The lawsuit says these federal actions are unlawful and violate the 10th Amendment, the separation of powers, the spending clause, the due process clause, the Administrative Procedures Act. In April, a federal judge issued a preliminary injunction blocking the White House from enforcing a plan to cut funding to cities such as San Francisco, Portland, Oregon, and Seattle, citing constitutional concerns over separation of powers and the overreach of executive authority. These rulings follow a series of court decisions dating back to 2017, and similar efforts under previous executive orders were found to violate the Constitution's spending clause. Okay, in terms of the community response, what went on during the early iterations of Sanctuary has served as a blueprint. First of all, people are organizing and setting up networks to respond to arrests. This is an example of the Tucson Community Rapid Response Network webpage. Churches, legal, and migrant aid organizations are conducting trainings, issuing red cards, which are about know your rights cards, signing people up for court accompaniment and quick response teams, like this one in Tucson. As for church sanctuary, some congregations have been pulling back while others are stepping up. As noted, shortly after taking office, the Trump administration rescinded a policy barring operations by ICE or border agents in sensitive or protected places, like houses of worship and schools. A number of Quaker meetings filed suit on January 27th, with the Baptists and Sikhs joining several days later. In February, other religious groups also filed a lawsuit, including the Mennonites and other Protestant groups like the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, Christian Church Disciples of Christ, Church of the Brethren, Episcopal Church, General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church, USA, and some regional United Christ of Church and United Methodist Church bodies. Additional plaintiffs include a Hispanic Baptist Convention in Texas, multiple Jewish groups, the Unitarian Universalist Association, and the State Council of Churches for Massachusetts, New York, North Carolina, Rhode Island, and Wisconsin. On February 24th, the plaintiffs in the first case were given a temporary reprieve. The groups in the second case are not yet protected since the judge limited his preliminary injunction to just the plaintiffs in his court. In his ruling, the judge noted ways that the plaintiff religious communities were already impacted by the Trump administration move. This included congregations where people, including those with legal status, noted they were worried about attending worship, English as a second language courses, and other gatherings. The judge highlighted a particularly stark example of a Community Baptist Foundation congregation where an English as a second language program dropped from about 30 people attending to just 10 after the new policy was announced. Additionally, the judge noted ICE's presence would be a particular problem for Quakers. Quote, in light of Quakers' pacifist views, the presence of armed law enforcement officers in or near their meeting houses is inconceivable and contrary to Quaker faith and harms Quaker religious practices by hindering attendees' ability to connect with God. Okay, these are other signs of that this heavy-handed crackdown is backfiring. ICE posted this list of sanctuary jurisdictions and then had to take it down the same day practically after the list was found to be full of errors. It included gun sanctuaries, which are places that basically support the Trump administration and that have declared themselves sanctuaries for gun rights. So this list was taken down from the ICE website the same day it was posted. Okay, here we have another example of community response that's taken place here in Massachusetts. We're seeing growing resistance. Thousands have protested in cities and towns across America. Lawsuits for excessive force have been filed. There's a family here in Chelsea, Mass. That's suing over an arrest because ICE smashed a car window with a sledgehammer to get at the father inside the vehicle with his children. What's going on in Los Angeles right now today is an example of this massive community response. The situation reached a boiling point in front of a Home Depot in Paramount, California over the weekend when ICE was staging there trying to arrest day laborers. The National Guard has now been called out to restore order. ICE says sanctuary city policies are to blame, but officials in Los Angeles say these protests have been caused by police state tactics that ICE is using and the arrests of any and all undocumented people, not just, quote, criminals, unquote. One egregious example is this case of Marcelo Gomez, an 18-year-old from Milford, Massachusetts, who was pulled from his car while on his way to volleyball practice last week. Originally from Brazil, he's an honor student who was brought here when he was about 6 years old. He's lived here his entire life, no criminal record, star of the volleyball team. And can you guess which one he is in this picture? That's right, he's the one with his hand over his heart during the national anthem. Okay, these are friends of this kid who went out and protested when he was arrested, over 1,000 people. These are friends of Marcelo, kid who was arrested. He was released on bond after 6 days of massive protests. More than 1,000 people gathered outside the courthouse the night he was arrested. One thing I've noticed putting this presentation together is how many young people are involved in these protests. Sanctuary back in the day was mostly little old ladies in tennis shoes. Now, by arresting young people, arresting parents in front of their kids, arresting people's friends and families, they're creating a whole new generation of resistance. Sanctuary in its broadest sense extends far beyond Central America and specific human refugees to the need for harmonious community among all that lives. Looking at the legacy and the lessons of sanctuary, I'd say the greatest legacy is how broadly this idea of sanctuary is now known and understood and practiced in a variety of places and contexts. It's no longer just activists and lawyers and a few churches, and it's not hidden like it was. This is one of the consequences of high-profile arrests and the targeting of sanctuary jurisdictions. It creates fear, but it also creates fearlessness and a broad understanding, as I said, of the concept of sanctuary. Another legacy we're seeing is the power of organizing and sticking together. Today, social media connections are essential to people connecting and enabling rapid response. Involving the news media as a means of gaining support is another lesson of sanctuary. Media coverage of the current crackdown has been extensive, making it a daily national concern. Constant arrests and deportations are not happening in secret without witnesses. Photos and videos from cell phones and front door cameras, like the ones of masked agents hauling a Tufts graduate student off the street a couple of months ago, are very important to gaining public support. All of this bad PR for ICE is creating an opportunity for reform, which is another legacy of sanctuary. People say they want, quote, illegal aliens, unquote, out, but to actually see what is happening, who is being targeted, has caused public support for ICE to drop. Just like hearing the stories of refugees in sanctuary caused people to feel compassion for them and to support sanctuary. Immigrants in Republican states are also being targeted, hurting the economies of these regions. So there's been a renewed push for immigration reform in Congress. We have to keep fighting for real reform, not just more border security. There's a growing awareness that the U.S. must have real pathways for people to get legal status. I don't want to minimize the challenges we face. These are unprecedented times. But I've been heartened by the level of response, of resistance, of fearlessness, of resistance on multiple levels. The sheriff of Barnstable County, the sheriff of the Cayman Islands, where I'm living now, said recently, saying nothing is complicit. The protests in LA, I believe, are a harbinger of things to come. To sum up, here are 4 lessons of sanctuary. 1, keep seeking common ground with opponents over shared moral outrage. 2, keep making the distinction between criminals and undocumented people. 3, keep the pressure on through legal means and nonviolent protest. And 4th, do not be afraid. Whatever risks we take pale in comparison to the risks faced by migrants and refugees here and all over the world.
Now we're opening it open to questions. Anybody have a question? Usually we type them in chat.
Okay. No questions? Comments?
Hi, Miriam. This is Alan Burt.
Hello, Alan.
Yeah, hey. So thank you so much for this. I mean, wow, what a horrendous place for us in America to be. Very troubled about what happened in LA yesterday, as I'm sure you are too. And are we going to be expecting the National Guard to be coming to Cape Cod?
Yeah, I mean, it looks like the protests in LA are just getting started. California is a whole nother world unto itself, as you know. It's a very different situation out there, and people are very upset about this because these communities that they're targeting are overwhelmingly Hispanic. And what happened is they just ran out of actual criminals. And so they have this mandate where they have to arrest 3,000 people a day. That's according to what I read, that the ICE officials came down on and said, go to Home Depots, go to 7-Elevens. I want you everywhere. So that's what they're trying to do. They've been trying to do that in LA, and there's been huge resistance to that, huge pushback to that. So I think that's kind of an example of what we're going to be facing in the future.
I was talking to Louis Ronda today. I guess he put out, which maybe everybody has seen here, that on June 14th in Plymouth, it's expected to be a pretty large gathering, protest about the Trump administration. So that sounds like that's going to be a critical point for a demonstration and potential National Guard.
June 14th. Okay. Yeah, what I'm hoping is that everybody will do something, sign up for a training, or, just if everybody just does one little thing, then we can really create a mass movement. And as we've talked about before, telling stories is so important, getting the actual stories of actual migrants out there and what they're facing. Really helps people to relate to and identify with the people that are being arrested and targeted. That it's people in our community. That it's not, random strangers. It's people we know. And the reaction to that kid being arrested in Milton was so, or Milford, I guess, was so telling, because the whole school just was up and up, ran out into the street as soon as he was arrested, and they just wouldn't let it go. So that was another great thing to see, that young people were really getting involved.
Again,
Francis,
thank you.
Sorry. Yeah.
Francis Marbury says, are there any meetings, meaning Quaker meetings, currently providing sanctuary?
That's a good question. I was wondering if anybody in this group might know that lawsuit that was filed, where it was a couple of Quaker meetings were given permission to, well, they weren't given permission. They were just, the judge ruled that, a preliminary injunction. The case has not actually been completely decided, but the judge issued a preliminary injunction saying that that they do have a protected right to provide sanctuary. But as we know, there's a lot of fights going on between the Trump administration and courts. They issue all these rulings, and then the courts come back and say, no, you can't do that. But whether they're going to abide by what the courts say is another thing. But as far as I know, there have not been any raids in churches, although they do arrest people when they come out of the church. And that's also what happened in 2014, 2015. People would go into sanctuary in a church, and then as they would exit the church, just even sometimes to, see family or go to work, or so that's why at Southside they didn't, that woman did not leave the church for 15 months straight. And it was really difficult. But that's a good question, whether people are actually providing sanctuary. The thing is, there's been sort of a turn towards providing secret sanctuary again, because you don't want to, this was a debate during the initial sanctuary movement. If by going public, are we going to be calling attention to ourselves and putting the refugees in more danger? And after they realized that they were already being targeted, they decided we want to get public support. But there has been sort of a move the other direction now, where they're deciding that it's not safe because the Trump administration apparently doesn't really care about, bad PR. They already have enough bad PR. But I'm hoping that there'll be so much bad PR that they actually will start to care about it. But I don't know exactly who is providing sanctuary, because that's sort of become a secret thing again. There's on the Presbyterian Church website, Presbyterian USA website, there's an extensive webpage about providing church sanctuary. What are the risks? What are the practical implications of it? It's like a guide for churches that are considering providing sanctuary. And that's on the Presbyterian Church website if people are interested in that.
I've heard about a lot of people being arrested on Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket, and a lot of workers, just off the boat or getting onto the boat. And I was wondering if anybody in those two islands has been providing sanctuary. I guess Katrina Nevins.
Yeah, are there people here from the Vineyard? Would anybody know anything about that?
Katrina Nevins' mom is here.
I'm here. Sarah Nevin.
Sarah Nevins, yeah.
Sarah, do you know anything about? Yeah.
I mean, I'm from the Vineyard, and all I've heard from, my sort of people I know there is that, the Brazilian people we know, and people from Venezuela, they're just terrified. They don't come out of their houses. They've stopped sending their kids to school largely. It's just too scary. And I made the film, the film on the 49 migrants from MSNBC a couple of years ago, and we recently had a screening with Joy Reid hosting. You may know who she is, from MSNBC, and she made the point that maybe that story, which is a local story to a lot of us, but it went international, of DeSantis dropping off 49 Venezuelan migrants on the Vineyard, that might have been a kind of a testing ground to see what they could get away with.
Yeah, it's interesting. That happened that was under the Biden administration that happened. So they were already ramping up the plan that they implemented as soon as Trump came into office. And Kate, we should just point out that those 49 migrants who were dropped off, they have all received legal status because they were kidnapped. Is that correct?
I don't know if that's why, but they actually had legal papers. I mean, they were all, going through proper chains, and even though they, obviously the right wing loves the word illegal alien, so that's what you'll hear, but it's not true.
Right.
They were technically kidnapped, but I don't know if I don't think justice was ever done. I don't think DeSantis was ever taken to court on that. I think there could have been a lot stronger response. And I guess, Miriam, to your point, we should keep our courage and keep fighting however we can.
Right, right. Yeah, I had heard that because they had been kidnapped off the streets of San Antonio, that they were given some sort of legal protection.
Most
But
of them went to Boston, outside Boston, and they were given places to, they're put in shelters. But
yeah,
that
Yeah,
doesn't
and
make it
then they
easy.
found work and places to live and stuff. But
yeah,
that wasn't the same idea. They weren't arrested while they were going to work. They were just taken to another place.
right, exactly. You know, now we're seeing just sweeps, you know, and these workplace sweeps. That historically, they stayed away from workplaces because business owners are Republicans and they don't want their whole staffs being taken away. So this is why they focus so much of the immigration crackdown on the border for so many years. The idea was, oh, if we could just stop everyone at the border, then we won't be bothering the functioning of all these businesses that rely so much on immigrant labor. So there may be some increasing tension now between business owners and what's going on under the Trump administration, because this is going to hurt the American economy if this continues, because
Well,
these laborers are essential.
One thing locally, one place that really does need attention, if there are people out there who want to be advocating and present to prevent ICE from taking people, is the steamship docks, whether that's in Hyannis or Woods Hole, because like having been on the boat on Friday, going and coming back, there are a lot of workers going and coming still. They're not stopping. They're still going to their jobs, and it's very vulnerable because they're on steamship property. They're in transit. They haven't gotten into a car yet. That's probably the most vulnerable location we have around here on the Cape.
and
Other than job sites, but a job site, as you say, is more difficult. So transiting on the steamship is where I would focus if there are people out there who want to be attending. I know there were people on the island who had signs last week or whenever it was in Vineyard Haven that said ICE is on the island, and they just stood there with the signs to let people know.
people. And these people park in Woods Hole and they walk from the Steamship Authority over close to where we live, because we live in Woods Hole. And so I see them every day with their lunch boxes and their work clothes trudging back to their cars. So that's
Yeah,
how,
and I don't know if ICE would be allowed on the ferry, but that would be even worse, I imagine.
yeah.
So
Yeah, is there at meeting today they were talking about Indivisible doing some trainings. So I don't know, is there an organized group on the Vineyard that people could contact, or that group needs to be organized, I guess,
I
Ellie?
think Indivisible, I think, is the most active.
Indivisible.
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely. On the Cape as well.
Dora Rodriguez has raised her hand. Would she like to speak?
Hi, everyone. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for being present. And this is one beautiful way to be in community and get the strength from each other and encourage each other. I just want to share it in Tucson, Arizona. We already seen people being arrested who overstayed their visas. So this is another population they are targeting, because obviously they have their information, they have their data. And a couple of young women who were arrested under the provision that they overstay with their tourist visa are being released with ankle bracelets. So they are trying to do all they can to get the number, because they have to have the quota every day.
Right,
So it's like the prisons
right.
where they have a quota. So now they have to get 3,000 people across the country. So they're targeting the groups that they were already have the data from these families. So I just want you to be aware too that the population is being targeted too. But thank you so much for doing this, Miriam. This is uplifting, and in a moment that we all must feel each other. And what are we here for? Thank you.
Thank you, Dora. You're exactly right. They and this is what concerned people so much about DACA, you know, they were like you give your information to the government and we'll protect you. Oh, sorry, you know, we changed our mind. So, you know, I feel really bad for people who trusted the government to protect them, and then they're finding that they'd be better off to have not trusted the government. And Dora, you're right. Half of the undocumented people are visa overstayers. And since they can't get anyone else at the border, they're now going after these people who have overstayed work visas, student visas. And we see a huge attack on students here in the Massachusetts area. As you know, they're trying to prevent international students from coming to Harvard. I mean, it's just crazy what they're doing. But that's another whole population that in the past had not been targeted by ICE. Sarah, you had something to say?
Yeah, just to add to that, the numbers that they're going after, you know, of course, Biden created the CHNV program, the Cuban, Haitian, Nicaraguan, and Venezuelan program, which was allowing folks to come in and fly in to skip the Darien Gap from those 4 countries through the Humanitarian Parole Authority. Which Trump has, you know, pulled the plug on day one. That's 533,000 individuals now available to them to deport. And similarly with temporary protected status, as each country's status is coming up for renegotiation, they're saying no. They're just making it easier and easier for them to go after people whose data they know. Right? These are people who have played by the rules, who have applied, who have been given promises and by another president, and then out of sheer retribution and hate and fascistic fervor, this new regime is pulling the plug on those promises. So I want to just put a plug in to everybody. I know you guys in Massachusetts, you've got the good senators, and they're going to vote against what Anat Shenker-Osorio has renamed the mass murder bill, as opposed to the big beautiful bill, because it will murder a lot of people, whether it's immigrants or folks who live on SNAP benefits or need Medicare, Medicaid. Anyway, we must hit up our senators and encourage all our communities to hit up our senators this week to vote no against that bill, because that bill is chock full of funding to expand the border industrial complex, to raise the number of funded beds ICE is given money for from 41,500 a day, which is already too many, and it's already peaked over 50,000. There are about 51,000 people in ICE detention today. They're trying to double that to 100,000. Once you let that genie out of the bottle, you can never put it back in. And of course, expand the size of ICE and the size of CBP. So yes, get out into the streets and the folks right around you and do your rapid response networks, etc. But let's also make sure that our senators know that if they vote for this, they will not have a job in 2 years' time. Thank you. Thank you so much, Miriam. This is great.
Yes, you're absolutely right, Sarah. You know, we have to work on all these different levers: the social, the political, the legal, the moral, and spiritual. All these planes.
100%.
I'm very worried about the workers. We just had our house reshingled, and it was a gang of fabulous Brazilian guys. And my husband and I were both sitting outside watching for the black vans so we could stand in the way if anybody was going to try to take these guys away. Because, you know, they didn't speak English as their primary language. They were clearly South American. And so they would have been ripe for the plucking. But thank God, nobody noticed them, and they got away after finishing their work. But it's just been so much on my heart that I just trying to figure out what I could do. I'm too old to tackle an ICE agent, and too small. But, you know, there's so much I would like to do if there was a way to know what would be good to do.
Yeah, I guess we're saying indivisible, is the group that's coordinating actions on the Cape. Do other people have any?
That sounds good. I will get in touch with them.
Okay. And then there's the Falmouth Immigration Network. What is that? What is it, Brenda? What's the name of that? Falmouth Immigration Rights Coalition. Okay. So those are the couple of groups, and they are coordinating, I hope, rapid response networks and, you know, tracking what's going on. And then on the Vineyard too, there's clearly people on the Vineyard that are very concerned about this. I'm not quite sure what's happening on Nantucket, but.
So I've got my hand up. I just wanted to follow up on the comments about calling senators around the budget bill. Indivisible has got a really fabulous phone banking thing going on through the National Indivisible. So if you look them up online, and it's also calling in states where there are Republican senators who are considered persuadable.
Okay.
Very effective.
Good. That sounds great. Yeah, I would encourage everybody to just do one little thing.
There's one question from Paula, and let's see if I can scroll all the way back to this. Let's see. What is the good of red cards about knowing the rights when ICE agents are not following any of the established rules? In other words, going into schools, restaurants, churches, etc.
Yeah, apparently you don't have to let them into your house. People need to know that they need a criminal warrant. They can't, most of the time they just have civil warrants. So they would need an actual criminal warrant, which would, you know, say that they had evidence that someone had actually committed a crime. So that's one thing that people need to know about. That's one of the things these red cards have. The red cards also, you know, just basic things. Don't say anything. Here's some numbers that you can call, you know, just ways in which strategies that you can use to try to protect your rights as much as possible. And they have them in Spanish. And around here, as we're discussing, most of the migrants are Brazilian and they speak Portuguese. So it's a different population than you see on the border. But I think that there's also stuff, you know, work being done with Portuguese speaking migrants as well, the red cards. So that's the main thing. Don't let them into your house. You don't have to. So, but that's why they're targeting people on the street. You know, they wait until people come out of their house. So another really important thing we have are cell phone videos, you know, that people can take pictures of what's happening. But once they get somebody into their prison system, it can be, unless there's tons of public pressure, like with this kid or the guy they just brought back from El Salvador. These people are like in a black hole. You know, you just can't, their lawyers can't get them. They'll move them around. So the lawyers don't even know where they are. So there's a lot of, it's a very scary time. There's no doubt about it. So, okay, we have here the Atlanta Friends meeting passed a sanctuary minute, but does include specific actions the meeting will take. Yeah, that's frequently, we're seeing a lot of fear even among churches that they will be targeted, that they will be arrested. And that's what's so admirable about the original sanctuary workers is they were very alone. People didn't even know what they were doing. And there was a lot of opposition, not understanding what sanctuary was. So when they declared sanctuary, it was like they knew that they were going to be arrested. So, Mom.
Thank you.
All right. Oh, okay. Are we, is there anything else that anybody would like to say this time? It's only taken us an hour to have this whole conversation. Nancy, yes.
Nancy Janus?
Okay. Am I muted?
No, I can hear you.
Okay. I just sent you a chat, I think, to ask if everyone was familiar with the app 5 Calls. And you can download that on your smartphone. You go there and it gives you all the issues, and then you click on what you're concerned about. It gives you the phone number of your senators, and it even gives you a script. So that's called 5 Calls. And we have even ignored all of the ones that they put up there and just said, we're entirely opposed to the big, beautiful bill. And we want our senator to know that and to vote against it.
Great. Okay, I just got a text, a message here from Michael Cameron. Can you say something about Cameron, our son, getting less mariachi work? People are afraid to congregate in backyards. Okay, so there's been, even the mariachis have been afraid to come out and play. And then John, my brother, was saying he went to get his tires worked on at Walmart. The entire staff of the tire department was gone. Either they had quit or were told that you don't come back because they were feared they were going to be targeted. So I think we're going to be seeing a pretty big impact on economic activity in the United States. It's just starting now, but if this goes on, it's going to be extremely harmful because immigrants are so essential to our functioning of so many industries in America and so many businesses. So, okay, 5 calls. That sounds great. And did you put up a link about the 5 calls or just mentioned it here? A daily practice.
I didn't put a link, but if you go to the App Store, that's where I got it.
Okay, great. All right. Well, thank you everybody so much for participating in this conversation. Is there anything else that anyone would like to say that I forgot to mention?
I would.
Yes,
I'd
please.
like to say that everybody here are immigrants, unless they were Native Americans. And that this particular thing that's going on now with migrants is they're just taking the weakest link. And it's also a very racist regime, shall we call it a regime or coup. And that who is being taken now is even more desperate to make a point. And on the 14th is going to be a military parade worthy of Hitler. And that we should understand that, yes, we are also immigrants, and that anybody in this current regime is basically illegal when he decides it's illegal. Making Paula's point, what do we do when they're not following by the rules?
Right, right.
I think I can't even finish that thought. But we're all in this together. And what happened in LA was very heartening. You know, 2,000, what do you call it, National Guard were sent. But if you look at the videos, I mean, the videos are a godsend. They show that the people in Los Angeles are out in force. How long we can keep it up, but we must, you know.
Yes, that's a really good point. And, you know, during the early days of sanctuary, they were targeting the sanctuary workers themselves. And then they realized that these people have too much support, you know, these white people who are pastors and they're embedded in the community. And what we really need to be doing is targeting the migrants because they don't have the support. So, you know, this practices of accompaniment, practices of, you know, just getting out there and standing there with a sign. I mean, that really, as small as it seems, I think that's what that does make a difference. We have to believe that these actions do make a difference. And I just want to encourage everybody to keep the faith, keep your spiritual values intact, because as those messages from Jim Corbett said, you know, this is a sanctuary is something, the need for harmonious community among all that lives. So we can practice sanctuary every day in a lot of ways. Thank you so much, everybody. It's been a great meeting, and see you soon.
Thank you very much. This will be recorded and will be posted on our website. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica.
Thank you, Erica. Thank you, Miriam. God bless.
Thank you. Hold everybody in the light.